She found the letter on a Wednesday morning in November, folded into thirds, and pressed flat between the lining and the inner seam of her husband's gray overcoat, where it had slipped and gone quiet, like a thing that understood it ought not to be discovered. Gwendolyn did not open it right away. She stood in the entrance hall of the house on Spruce Street, with the coat over one arm and the letter in her other hand, and breathed the way her father had taught her to breathe, when a ledger column refused to balance, slow, deliberate, before reaching for the pen. Then she broke the seal. If you are new to Victorian Souls, please subscribe and follow Gwendolyn's story all the way to the end. You will not want to stop before you see what she does next. And drop a comment below. Tell me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Gwendolyn Merritt had turned 27 in August, in the same house where she had turned every age before it, except that by August the house on Spruce Street had been Conrad Bellamy's house for 8 months, and she had been Mrs. Bellamy for the same length of time, which she still occasionally forgot, until she heard it spoken aloud by someone who did not know her well enough to call her by her given name. She had not chosen Conrad. That was the honest way to put it, though not the complete way. She had agreed to him, which was different, and she had agreed because her father's lawyer, Mr. Fisk, had brought her the arrangement 6 weeks after Caius Merritt's death, with the paperwork already drawn and the reasoning sound in the way that reasonable men's reasoning tended to sound when a woman was still too hollowed out by grief to argue with it. The Merritt mill was real, profitable, and ran on contracts that needed a man's name on them in order to be renewed. That was the plain fact of 1857, and Gwendolyn had understood plain facts since before she was tall enough to reach the desk where her father kept his books. She had stood in Mr. Fisk's office in October and agreed to Conrad Bellamy the same way she agreed to all necessary uncomfortable things, with her chin level and her voice steady and the full knowledge of what it cost. Conrad was 31, second son of a Philadelphia banking family, pleasant-mannered and careful in his dress and not unkind. He had the quality she had noticed in several men who were not unkind, that his consideration for her was real but incurious, the way one might be considerate toward a piece of furniture one appreciated, but did not think about. He ran the household accounts without mistakes. He was present at dinner most evening. He did not drink heavily or speak poorly of her in company. What she and Conrad were not, was anything more than that. They shared a house and a name, and the understanding that the mill's books went through her in the mornings and through him in the afternoons, and that was, on most days, sufficient. She had told this to her closest friend in the world, the only person she had trusted with the inner shape of her actual life since childhood. Odette Crowe had listened, sitting across the small table in Gwendolyn's private sitting room, with her hands wrapped around a teacup, and said, as she always did, the thing that felt most like the truth. She had said, "You have arranged your life with intelligence, Gwen. That is not nothing. Most people arrange their lives with feeling, and look where that gets them." Gwendolyn had valued that. She had valued Odette's clarity and her unflinching honesty and the 18 years of friendship that had survived Gwendolyn's father's success and Odette's family's slow, quiet dissolution into genteel poverty, the kind that maintained appearances right up until it could no longer afford to. Gwendolyn had helped where she could, without accounting for it, the way you did not account for things done for people who were part of the structure of your life. She thought about Odette now, standing in the entrance hall on a November morning with the opened letter in her hand, and felt something she could not immediately name settle cold and specific in the center of her chest. The letter was from Mortimer Bellamy, Conrad's cousin, a man she had met 3 times, at family occasions where he moved through rooms with the careful ease of someone who had calculated his welcome and found it sufficient. He was older than Conrad by 10 years, with the look of a man who had once expected more than he received, and had arranged his face around that expectation permanently. She had not disliked him. She had not thought about him enough to form a strong opinion of any kind. The letter was brief, 4 paragraphs in a small compressed hand. She read it twice, then she folded it exactly as it had been folded and replaced it in the coat pocket with care. She went upstairs to her sitting room and sat at the small desk and looked out the window at the November street below and thought, with the same mechanical precision she used on the mill accounts, about what she had just read. The mill partnership papers were scheduled to be signed at the dinner party Conrad had arranged for Friday evening. 20 guests, Philadelphia Merchant Society, the Harrington brothers, who controlled half the wool trade in Pennsylvania. She had thought the dinner was about the new Southern routes. Conrad had presented it to her that way, casually, 2 weeks ago, over a breakfast. She now recalled with uncomfortable clarity the exact angle of his attention, the particular warmth of his explanation, the way he had leaned slightly forward when he described the opportunity. He had been performing for her. She understood that now. The partnership he intended to sign on Friday was not with the Harrington brothers, according to Mortimer's letter. It was with a holding company called Bellamy and Strand, which was, in legal structure, Conrad's name and Mortimer's financial interest, dressed in a different coat. Once Conrad signed as the mill's managing partner, a role Gwendolyn had allowed him to step into for the purpose of renewing the contracts. Effective control of the Merritt Mill's operating agreements would pass to Bellamy and Strand for a period of 15 years. 15 years was long enough to empty an estate. One sentence in the third paragraph stopped her. Gwendolyn relies on Miss Crow's judgment almost exclusively for matters outside the mill. Miss Crow has confirmed that she will not interfere. Will not interfere. She sat with that for a long moment. Then she stood, went to her writing desk, and drafted a short note to Mr. Fisk. He came that afternoon. He was a small, precise man of 60 who had served the Merritt family for 22 years and who had the quality that the best lawyers shared: the ability to receive very bad news without his face doing anything unhelpful. She handed him the letter. He read it. He set it down without speaking for a full 30 seconds. The partnership structure as described, he said finally, would be legal if Conrad signs as managing partner, under the terms of your current household agreement. He looked at her steadily. The household agreement gives him authority to enter into operating contracts on behalf of the mill for periods of up to 20 years. My father drafted that agreement. Your father drafted it to give a husband sufficient authority to manage the business without constant legal consultation. Mr. Fisk paused. He did not draft it to provide a mechanism for transferring effective control to a third party. But it does. As written, yes, if Conrad signs Friday. She considered that. Can it be stopped? The household agreement contains a clause your father insisted upon. Any operating contract signed without the co-signature of the primary heir is voidable within 30 days if the heir can demonstrate material misrepresentation in the negotiation. He paused again. That clause was considered unusual. Your father was insistent. She almost said, my father knew. She did not say it, because she was not yet certain what he had known or when, and she needed to be precise. What I need, she said instead, is for you to be present on Friday evening, not as a guest, as counsel. Mr. Fisk looked at her for a long moment. You intend to address this publicly? I intend to address it correctly, she said. Those are sometimes the same thing. She spent Thursday going through 8 months of correspondence between herself and Odette. Not looking for the obvious, but for the shape of what Odette had known and when she had known it. She found it in a letter from October, 2 weeks after the dinner was announced. Odette had written, Conrad seems very much in his element these days. I imagine he has plans he has not shared with you yet. Men like him always do. I should not worry about it, Gwen. He has the mill's interest at heart, I believe. She had written back, you are probably right. She had read that letter at the time as the reassurance of a friend. She read it now as the careful steering of a woman who knew exactly what was coming and wanted her to feel calm about it. She put the letters away and sat with the knowledge of what Odette had done, until the knowledge had a clean, settled shape in her mind, rather than the ragged edges of something still being understood. Then she went to dress for dinner. Conrad noticed nothing at dinner that Thursday. She observed him across the table the way she had begun observing him 8 months ago, with the specific attention she gave to any arrangement she needed to understand fully. He spoke about the weather and the upcoming dinner, and a play he had read about in the paper, and when she said yes, the menu was settled. His smile held something she now recognized as satisfaction slightly adjacent to relief. He believed she did not know. She ate her soup and thought, you spent 8 months building my trust, and I want you to understand something. It worked. That was the part that was going to require the longest time to process. Not the scheme itself, which was comprehensible, but the specific cost of having believed something constructed deliberately to be believed. She set the feeling aside. There was work to do first. Friday arrived the way important days arrived in difficult circumstances, faster than she was prepared for, and at exactly the right moment. The guests came at 6. The candles were lit, and the table was set, and Conrad received his Philadelphia Merchant Society, with the grace of a man who had arranged this evening, with great care, which he had. He caught Gwendolyn's eye once from across the room and gave her the small, warm smile she had come to associate with his better moods. She returned it with precise accuracy. Inside Conrad's mind, everything was moving on its anticipated track. The Harrington brothers had come. The millmen were drinking and talking. The papers were in his study upstairs, waiting for the moment after the last course when the real conversation could happen. He had not told Gwendolyn the details, because she was meticulous with the accounts and would have noticed the structural irregularities. But she trusted Odette's opinion implicitly, and Odette had done exactly what Mortimer had asked. And so the dinner had been presented as a business development opportunity, and Gwendolyn had organized the menu and arranged the flowers and been, as she was about most things, efficient and cooperative. He told himself he would not leave her destitute. The plan transferred control of the operating agreements, not the underlying property. She would keep the house. She would keep the mill building. She would simply lack the commercial agreements that made it profitable, which would in time make its sale necessary. And Mortimer's holding company would be positioned to make a generous offer. He had not examined this reasoning very carefully for the last several weeks. He found he preferred not to. The soup course came and went. The fish arrived and was praised. Conrad made a toast to Philadelphia commerce, which was received warmly. Gwendolyn sat at her end of the table and spoke to her dinner companions, and did not look at him in any way that suggested anything was different from any other Friday. It was when the dessert plates were being cleared that she rose. Not when the women were meant to withdraw. Before that, she rose, and the table's conversation settled into the particular silence of a room that understands something unanticipated is occurring. "Before the evening concludes," she said, and her voice carried to every corner of the room without her having raised it, "I believe there is a matter of business that every person at this table deserves to know about." Conrad set down his dessert fork. "I was not aware until this week," Gwendolyn continued, "that the partnership papers my husband intends to present this evening would transfer operating authority over the Merritt Mill to a holding company in which his cousin Mortimer Bellamy holds a controlling financial interest." She paused. "I was led to believe the arrangement concerned the southern trade routes and involved the Harrington partnership directly. It does not." The room had gone completely still. One of the Harrington brothers set down his glass. "I beg your pardon," he said slowly. "The Harrington partnership was presented to me as the centerpiece of this dinner." Gwendolyn looked at him steadily. "Were you shown partnership documents this week, Mr. Harrington?" "I was." His voice had changed. "They described a joint operating agreement with the Merritt Mill. My brother and I came tonight expecting to discuss the terms. Those documents appear to have been used to assemble the guest list for this evening, rather than to represent a genuine offer." She looked down the table at Conrad. "I would appreciate it if my husband could correct me if I have understood this incorrectly." Conrad was very still. He had the expression of a man performing a rapid internal calculation. Not panic, not yet, but the working mechanics of a mind assessing exits. He had good nerves. She had always known that. "Gwendolyn," he said carefully, "I think this conversation is better had in private." "I think," she said, "that a contract affecting the commercial livelihoods of everyone at this table is better discussed in full view of everyone at this table." She reached into the small evening bag beside her plate and produced a single folded document. "Mr. Fisk, who has served as the Merritt family's legal counsel for 22 years, is in my study. I would like to invite him to join us." Mr. Fisk entered 2 minutes later with his briefcase and his expression of professional calm, and the dinner party, which had begun as a performance carefully staged by one person at the table, became something else entirely. What followed was not dramatic in the theatrical sense. There was no shouting, no overturned glasses, no moment of operatic collapse. There was instead the grinding, methodical business of a room full of men in trade understanding, one by one, that a contract they had been positioned to witness was not what they had been told it was. The Harrington brothers were the most useful. They had their own lawyer's number memorized and sent a messenger before 11 o'clock. Conrad did not leave. She had not expected him to. He was not the sort of man who left. He sat at the far end of the table and maintained his composure with the specific discipline of a man who understood that the room was watching him and that he still had some ground to defend. The guests departed by 10. The last to leave was Mr. Fisk, who pressed her hand at the door and said simply, "Your father was right to put that clause in." She thanked him and closed the door. She found Odette's note on the hall table, left by Mrs. Caldwell during the dinner. Brief: I cannot come tomorrow as planned. I am sorry, Gwen. Nothing else. She stood in the entrance hall with the note in her hand and felt the weight of 18 years pressed down on her shoulders, with a grief that was different from anger and different from betrayal, though it contained both. She had known Odette since they were 9 years old. She had stood beside her at her mother's funeral. She had lent money she had never asked back. She had valued, above almost everything, the particular honesty of a friendship she had believed was real. She put the note in the pocket of her evening dress and went to find Conrad. He was in the study, a drink untouched beside him. He looked up when she came in, and she saw him make the decision, not to apologize, not to minimize, but to try to explain on his own terms, which was what she had expected. Mortimer approached me 14 months ago, he said. I know. The plan. I know the plan. She sat down across from him, not close. Across. I am going to tell you what I know, and then I am going to ask you one thing, and after that I will tell you what happens next. He was quiet. The holding company. The misrepresented partnership terms. The co-signature clause, which Mortimer either overlooked or assumed I would not know about. She watched his face. You told me the dinner was about Southern routes, because you knew I would examine any document that involved the mill's operating agreements. You were right that I would have. You were wrong to think you had found a way around it. Conrad looked at his untouched glass. Something moved behind his eyes. Not guilt precisely, but something adjacent. The specific expression of a man who had been caught in a thing he had not quite admitted to himself was as serious as it was. Mortimer said you would never. He stopped. That I would never know? He did not answer. You relied on Odette, she said. Mortimer made the arrangement with her. I know. She had known since Wednesday. Since she had read Miss Crow has confirmed she will not interfere. She had held it carefully, because some knowledge needed to be held carefully before it could be used. Odette told him what I discussed in confidence, and confirmed I would not question the dinner's purpose, because I trusted her interpretation of it. She was quiet for a moment. I am going to be very clear with you now, Conrad. She met his eyes. I am going to ask Mr. Fisk on Monday to begin formal proceedings challenging the validity of the attempted contract under the misrepresentation clause. I am also going to inform Mortimer, directly, in writing, that if he initiates any further legal action against the Merritt estate, the evidence of his arrangement with you and with Miss Crow will be submitted in full. She paused. If you have something you would like to say to me, now is the time to say it plainly, because after tonight, I intend to have this conversation through counsel. Conrad was quiet for a long moment, then he said, I am sorry, Gwendolyn. She looked at him. She believed he meant it, in the specific limited way, that men who had done things they had not examined carefully enough were sorry when the examination was finally forced. It was not the kind of sorry that changed what had happened. It was the kind that documented it. I know, she said, and left the room. She went to Odette the following morning. She did not send a note first. She arrived at the small rooms off Chestnut Street, where Odette had lived, since the end of her family's last pretense of solvency, and she knocked, and when Odette answered the door, the expression on her face was the expression of a woman who had been expecting this, and who had not slept. They sat in Odette's small parlor with no tea. Neither of them suggested it. How much, Gwendolyn said, did Mortimer offer you? Odette did not look away. She had always had that quality, a refusal to perform innocence when none existed. Enough to settle my brother's debts, and a position as housekeeper at the Bellamy property in Bucks County. A position. It is a real position, with real pay. Her voice was steady but only just. I know how that sounds. It sounds, Gwendolyn said carefully, like you were offered security you needed, and told yourself that what I would lose was manageable. She looked at Odette's face, the familiar lines of it, the jaw she had known since they were children. Was that how you thought of it? A long silence. I told myself you had Conrad, Odette said. I told myself the mill would still be there, just managed differently. I told myself. She stopped, started again. I knew what I was doing, Gwen. I am not going to tell you I didn't. I knew, and I let myself find the reasoning that made it possible. Her voice dropped. I have been in that position for a long time. Finding the reasoning. You have never had to do that. Gwendolyn heard this and sat with it and did not dispute it. Because it was true. She had been given her father's ledgers to read at an age when Odette's family had already begun the slow slide that ended in a brother's unpayable debts, and the difference between those two starting points was not character. It was circumstance. You should have told me, Gwendolen said. When Mortimer approached you, you should have come to me. I know. I would have found another way. I know that too. Odette pressed her lips together. I think I was afraid that if I told you, it would mean admitting how bad things had become, and then I was afraid that if you helped me again, I would spend the rest of my life in your debt. She stopped. Which was beginning to feel like its own kind of weight, Gwendolen said quietly. Odette looked at her sharply, then after a moment, yes. Gwendolen understood this. She did not like understanding it, but she did. She had given Odette help the way her father had given her knowledge, freely, with genuine intention, and without accounting for whether the shape of the giving fit the shape of what was actually needed. She had not thought to ask whether it had become a burden. That was her failure, not Odette's only one, but hers. I am going to be very angry with you, she said, for a considerable length of time. I know. And I am going to ask Mr. Fisk to require Mortimer to produce the nature of his arrangement with you, as part of the proceedings, which means your name will be attached to this matter publicly. Odette closed her eyes briefly. I know that too. But I am not going to be the instrument of your complete ruin over something that Mortimer Bellamy used your desperation to build. She held her friend's gaze. You were wrong. You were also used. Those two things can both be true, and I intend to hold both of them, and I intend to figure out, over a long time, what they mean for us. Odette's breath caught. Not today, Gwendolen said. Not this month, but eventually. She stood and smoothed the front of her coat. Write me when you're ready to tell me everything Mortimer told you. Every conversation, every arrangement, every name he mentioned. I need the full account for Mr. Fisk. She paused at the door. And Odette, do not disappear. Whatever you think I might do, don't disappear. She walked out into the November street. The proceedings Mr. Fisk initiated the following week were not swift, because nothing in law was swift, but they were thorough. Mortimer's counsel challenged the co-signature clause on 3 separate grounds and lost on all 3. The misrepresentation of the dinner's purpose was documented through the testimony of both Harrington brothers, who had been told enough of the scheme's surface to be credible witnesses, and who were by that point entirely uninterested in protecting a man who had used their names as decoration. Odette wrote her account in 11 pages. She did not leave anything out. When Gwendolen received it and read it through, she found 3 things she had not known. The name of Mortimer's New York attorney, the existence of a similar scheme Mortimer had attempted against another Philadelphia widow 3 years prior, and the information that Conrad had not known about Odette's involvement until Mortimer told him 6 weeks before the dinner. She sat with the last detail for a long time. It did not change what Conrad had done. He had known about the misrepresentation and had proceeded with it. But it changed the texture of it, slightly, in the way that a small additional fact sometimes shifted the weight of what you were looking at without changing its essential shape. She asked Mr. Fisk to include Mortimer's previous scheme in the formal record, and to request the identity of the other widow. When the name came back, she wrote the woman a letter, explained what she knew, offered to share the documentation, invited a reply whenever the woman felt was right. The reply came 3 weeks later. 2 pages, the handwriting tight with the particular compression of a person who had been holding something difficult for a long time. She had not had a Mr. Fisk. She had not had a co-signature clause. She had lost 18 months of operating revenue before she understood what had happened, and by then the window for legal remedy had closed. Gwendolen wrote back the same day and did not stop the correspondence. The formal outcome arrived in February. The attempted partnership contract was voided in full. Mortimer Bellamy was ordered to surrender all preliminary documents he had circulated under false pretenses, and was formally censured by the court, which was not imprisonment, but which created a legal record that his New York attorney found, by all accounts, inconvenient. The mill kept its operating agreements. The southern routes came through a genuine arrangement with the Harrington brothers, who had developed by that point a specific interest in doing business with Gwendolen Merritt rather than any man who might represent her, which she found both useful and, in its way, a kind of answer to a question she had not known she was asking. Conrad remained in the house on Spruce Street through the winter. They did not discuss the dinner party again directly. They were careful with each other, the way people were careful with things they could not yet decide whether to keep or release. By spring there was an understanding between them that was not forgiveness and was not condemnation, but was something quieter and more practical. Two people who had begun in a contract and who were deciding, slowly and without drama, what that contract was actually worth. She did not have a name for what they were. She was not certain she needed one yet. What she had was the mill's February numbers, which were the best in 4 years. She had Mr. Fisk's letter confirming the voided contract, and Mortimer's censure and the documentation filed with the court. She had Odette's 11 pages in the filing box her father had used for important correspondence, alongside the letter from the other widow and the reply she had sent. She had, on a February morning with the windows fogged and the mill's accounts spread across the desk, her father had bought at auction, in 1842, the understanding that the most useful thing Caius Merritt had left her was not the mill or the house or the contracts. It was the knowledge that a woman who could read a ledger before she could properly hem a dress, who could stand in an entrance hall, with a letter that rearranged everything she believed, and still breathe before reaching for the pen, who could lose the thing she most trusted, the belief that she understood the people closest to her, and still be at her desk when the February numbers came in, was not a woman anyone was going to manage out of her own life. She opened the accounts to the first page of the month. She began to work.